Hi, everybody. This is Bob Ost at Theater Resources Unlimited, also known as TRU. For those of you who are new to us, we're an arts service organization that I created 32 years ago. I think it was 32 years ago, which of course elicits the same response from so many people. How come I never heard of you? I don't know. I don't know, but here you are, here we are, here you are, you found us. So what we do is we help people understand the business of theater and navigate the business of theater. We started off thinking that we were really a producers organization, and at our heart, we really are by mission dedicated to helping support and develop and nurture producers. But we learned a lot over 32 years of doing this. One of the first things I learned was that a lot of people are producers who don't know they're producers. We have a whole community of people in the room and in the city and all over the place, all over the world probably, artists, writers, actors, directors who produce themselves, self-producing artists, which we call SPA. We like SPA. And we also are helping with a lot of writers programs, and we're developing new works. So we do all sorts of stuff. Over 32 years, we've sort of evolved. Then something happened in 2020 on April 17th. Well, not on April 7th, on March 11th, my birthday in 2020. Suddenly, we had something called shutdown. COVID hit, and we went into shutdown. And this has been a arts service organization that's really been focused on New York for most of our existence. And then in 2020, we were forced to we had to open up a Zoom room, which is where we are right now. And if we were going to continue doing anything, because we couldn't do live programming, we had to do it on Zoom. So what happened consequently was that started having people come to our meetings from all over the United States, Canada, UK, Australia, Malaysia, and we're now global. I can't pretend to be New York centric anymore. So I don't know where you are. We're out there when you're finding us on YouTube or in our podcast, but welcome. We'd love to have you be part of the community as well. We meet every Friday, like I said, and I can invite you to that if you'd like to be in the room. You can just email me at trunltd@aol.com. That's trunltd@aol.com. Conversations have changed a lot over the past 4 years. In 2020, we talked about shutdown. We talked about the challenge of creating in isolation. Now we're back to something that resembles normal. It's the new but not improved normal that we're in right now, and we have to acknowledge. I do want to acknowledge that we haven't come back to the levels of audience support that we had before COVID. So there's still a lot of struggle going on. But in the 4 years that I've been doing these programs, we've talked about a lot of things that are not necessarily just theater. We've expanded into other areas. And today I'm going to go into an area that I don't particularly know that well, but I do know that there are a lot of people that thrive in it. And a lot of people use their creativity and their talents and their skills to create something we call documentaries. Theater, for the most part, tries to recreate life and behavior, human behavior on a stage, and makes up stories or borrows stories from existing histories that we know of, from life itself. But there's always something creative that goes into that makes it not a documentary. And we're going to talk about this with Sue exactly. How do you separate documentary from docudrama, I guess would be the other word for it. I'm going to bring Sue in right now. Sue Handman, who works for the Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment, and is also a dear friend. So I'm happy to have you with me today, Sue. We're going to talk about documentaries. What are they? Why are they? And why do you do it? So so let's start with your background, Sue. What is your background? How did you what did you do before 2020?
Hi, Bob.
Hello.
Um,
Hello.
I started out actually as a graphic designer. And I would say as a graphic designer, first in advertising and then moving towards editorial. So even that is going from very, very visual to more words started coming in as you get more editorial, where you're dealing with that sort of thing. So, and I have a theater background also. I was first going to come to New York and go to Juilliard and become an actor, as my parents were. So I had all of those skills. And then I decided mid-career to go into film. So I had all these loosely related skills as which all add into documentary and all add into filmmaking. I don't see a huge, you're using a lot of narrative skills to do documentary. I don't think you can completely separate the two.
It's still storytelling.
It's
Yeah.
storytelling. And
Honestly, I'm actually challenged at knowing by knowing where to draw the line when something really is a documentary, and when something is docudrama, and when something is just a purely is like an historical play. Is an historical play a documentary? I mean, not
well,
really.
I think yeah, a documentary, you're going to be sticking to the facts, and you're not going to
Oh,
be
don't all writers stick to the facts?
well, but you're the thing that is unique. You can do a documentary where it's just fact, 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 which is horribly boring to watch. I think even in a documentary, you need to have a point of view. You need to, something needs to, you're communicating something above and beyond just the facts of uh just beyond the basic facts of the situation. Otherwise, you have to have an interest in why you want to tell this story, which is very close to what narrative is, without altering the facts.
I think you suggest something very interesting to me. I think that what one thing that might be worth looking at is the impulse to create. The impulse to create a documentary might be different from the impulse to create a play about history. Um, I think point of view, of course, is relevant in both of them, but also how we approach the material as writers, as artists, might be a little different. You're theoretically striving for accuracy. Um, Christopher Nolan did not strive for accuracy necessarily in Oppenheimer, although a lot of what he says is accurate. But there are so many examples.
Well,
Oppen-
I'll give you, because I'm doing research right now on a new documentary having to do with the history of New York. And just in doing this research right now and finding out um, about slavery, about indigenous peoples that were living here, it was information that actually I realized how badly we were taught in school. It's not information that I have. Um, but to tell the breadth of New York history, there are so many choices that one could make to as threads to follow. It's very personal as to what thread do you want to follow. And in that sense, it is as much a narrative story as writing a play, because there are so many threads that I could pull on to tell the story of New York's history from, say, 1590 to consolidation, that it's very personal what I choose to tell. Um, and in that sense, it is as narrative as a narrative play, but I am going to be picking from research facts to tell that story. But I'm going
well,
to be picking and choosing those facts that tell the story that I want to tell.
and the process sounds identical to a playwright's process because it
Yeah.
sounds identical because we will research. I mean, we can create something out of
Whole
our
cloth.
whole
Yeah.
cloth. Yeah, exactly. Um, and we do. I mean, a lot of us do. We make, we make it up. We create it. We think of it. Um, I've written shows based on actual events and on actual people. I do this all the time, but
Mhm.
I don't consider myself a documentarian. Um, you had talked about point of view. That point of view is also implicit and important in any storytelling. And when we're doing a play or a movie or writing a book, it's always it's less confusing and much more satisfying if the audience sees a point of view. Point of view is basically what you have so that the audience or the reader doesn't go, why are you telling me this?
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Um, and what might be the difference between telling the story in a narrative sense is you might have a point of view and you might dramatize something. You might make up something based loosely on facts, but in connecting those dots, you would just make up something personal to get your point across. Whereas in a documentary, you would do the research to find out what actually happened here, or what are some of the theories from historians that could explain the behavior. I mean, I just was listening to a historian talk about the Dutch era, and he's saying nobody can know what was in these people's minds. But from the evidence that we saw, it could have been this or it could have been that. It could have been mean-spirited. It could have been out of just, they thought, they didn't think. And so you can present those facts as opposed to, and still make a point that you're interested in making, as opposed to doing a narrative thing where you'll make up something, a drama between two people or something to make the same point.
Well, Amy Stoller says playwrights make up dialogue, documentarians, if sticking by facts, do not. That still doesn't quite separate the two, because we have things like Is This a Room, which was produced by one of the people in a room, Jane Dubin, which was a word for word recounting um, of a story that really happened. It was based on the actual word for word. It's based on the actual words of the characters that are being presented on stage.
Mhm.
The Laramie Project and other works stick very faithfully to the words of the people they interviewed. Um,
Oh, think of Inherit the Wind. Apparently, the entire court scenes were verbatim from the court records.
oh, I didn't know that, and that's really interesting to know.
Yeah.
So there are elements of documentary and all over all over the place. Everywhere you look, you see elements of documentary. It's the distinction that we should at least start with is, I think documentaries tend to be filmed. I'm not sure. Is there anything on stage that would be considered a documentary, or would
Oh,
or it would
I
be
don't
called a
know.
docudrama?
That I don't know.
Or historical reenactment. I mean,
Right.
there's all sorts of ways of taking history and making something a work of art out of it, or
Yeah.
something that we hope is going to be a work of art, at least.
What I can tell you is one of the ways that I started doing this. I mean, I was doing a lot of the archival research originally when I first, because of my graphic design background, for half-hour documentaries. And during the pandemic, for me, the pandemic became this bizarre incubator for, for just pulling together all the skills that I had through artwork and theater and everything. And I started doing these 3-minute historical animations, which are completely they're historically correct, but they have a comic point of view, because I just found the weirdest real things out of 19th century history, just the weirdest facts, and then researched it carefully and then just dramatized it with archival materials that I could find. So and animated those materials. And I would stay up till 3 a.m. during the pandemic to do this. But it was the beginnings of the kind of research in this mini 3-minute thing. It's the extensive research you have to do. It's the storytelling and, what can I leave out and tell this story so that it's not boring, so that how much do I need to tell to have this story progress and have people understand the point of view?
I see that Amy Stoller is talking about, well, we're defining what I was talking about as verbatim theater, which is fine. And Jane wants me to mention that Dana H was also verbatim theater. So she said that it is performed by people other than those originally uttered the words. So while it has a strong documentary element, even purpose, it is still theater. The interesting, but again, there's a slippery slope, because there are well-respected documentaries that include found and actual footage, that includes actual stills that are used to tell the story and to visually tell it. But there are also reenactments. They have actor reenactments. I mean, there'll be a little thing that comes across the bottom of the screen that says this is a reenactment.
Right.
But it doesn't disqualify that work as for documentary. It's still embraced as documentary, even with actor reenactments of scenes and things that happened. So it's a very, to me, there's a very slippery slope. It's a very there's blurred lines for me between documentary and everything else that is historically related. One thing.
Why not make a documentary cinematic? And if you're talking about 16th century or 17th century, there's no film. So
yeah, so you're not gonna do any found footage of the founding of America.
Right. But there are people that have seriously researched these things and do reenactments. So why not depict it in film so that it dramatically puts across a reality?
Looking at Kate McLeod's talking about Ken Burns' Florentine films versus J.T. Rogers' play Oslo, in which the writer said he took dramatic liberties, might illustrate the difference. Well, there are many things that illustrate the difference. I think the conversation, for me, it's just fun having the conversation. Let's see if there's any other comments. Yes, I mean, Ken Burns. I mean, let's talk about Ken Burns for a second. So there is, as Amy points out, there's no found footage of Civil War, but Ken Burns found a way to make his documentary series very cinematic.
Right.
So Ken Burns' the Civil War is a great example of a brilliant documentary. The dramaturg.
He is basically using letters. He's using, he's having people read letters and things that are historical artifacts. The fact that you have footage of, it's not narrative in the sense that he's making something up, is the point I'm making.
And also the narrative in a documentary does not have to adhere to dramaturgical structure necessarily. I mean, you want a dramatic arc in any work of art. It's just more satisfying. However, there's no main character necessarily in a documentary, unless it's a documentary about that character.
You do want to find your characters, though. Even in a documentary, you do want to humanize certain figures along the way. Otherwise it just becomes, you need to have the audience have a place to focus. So you need to have your characters throughout a documentary.
And I want to remind the room that you can also do a virtual hand raise. Well, actually, don't do a virtual hand raise. It puts you on the screen, believe it or not. But let Ross know if there's anything you want to comment on or any questions you want to ask. I like the conversation about documentary because it just I find it very interesting. Well, you know we have a friend Tita. You know Tita.
Yes.
Tita is dedicated to research. She researches plays that she writes deeply, goes deeply into the research for them, and tries to recreate something that really is true to history. And I know other writers who do the same thing. And yet there are historical plays, Man for All Seasons. A lot of it may be true. I mean, it may be factual. It may have real moments in it. But overall, there's a playwright creating something out of this raw material that is not an exact. It's not a documentary. I mean, I don't think anybody would disagree with that. Maybe they would, but I don't think The Lion in Winter or Man for All Seasons or any of these, or Murder in the Cathedral. I think I'll go back to what I said. What is it, the motivation to write, to create this? I think a documentarian's motivation is a little different than a playwright's motivation. The playwright wants to find something in this story that is universal, which I guess documentarians want to do that as well. But they're looking for the universality. They're looking for the themes, and obviously you're also looking for the themes.
Yes, you are.
But it comes from, I can't put my finger on it. It comes from a different place.
I can only tell you, for instance, in the current thing I'm researching, where I struggled with, after reading books after book and everything on the internet that I could from this long period of New York history, it's like, oh, I'm beginning to see this is the long struggle for people to say, I want mine. I need to have a piece of this pie. And it's everybody has given lip service along the way to saying all men are created equal, except nobody bothered to define what is a man. So you're not a man yet. All white people are created equal. And we're going to have diversity among European whites. And then it's like, but you don't fit in. And then you have revolution. And it's like, no. I can't do all the work. I got to fit into this somehow. So it became, as a series, I'm beginning to see a theme going through this all the way up to consolidation, where there's a repeat that happens through many kinds of government. So I'm going to start, now that I have that theme, I'm going to start picking and choosing, okay, what is happening in history that supports that theme? What are the details that are supporting that theme? Oh my God, this happened here, and then they started doing that there, and that's all leading in the same direction. I'm going to discount that. It's interesting, but it takes me too far afield. That's very close to narrative storytelling.
Narrative storytelling, I think, is the key element of documentaries, and it's not necessarily the key element of plays. I'm actually not narrated storytelling. You don't have you don't depend on reenactments. You don't depend on individuals interaction as much as there is no play without individual interaction, without characters who are interacting and want things. Ross, tell me what that refers. It's certainly not the key element of Aristotelian plays, which is not the key narrative.
Yeah. So Aristotle says tragedy is an imitation of an action, not of narrative. And at the time, he was talking about, the difference between Sophocles and Homer, because Homer's always like, then Telemachus did this, then Telemachus did that. And in plays, it was like, no, we're just going to show what he did. So those were the key differences between tragedy and like epic poems. But I guess, yeah, now it applies to normal plays and
Okay.
documentaries. Sure.
I
Okay.
don't think I would have to say though, but that the fact that documentaries tend to be narrated is not necessarily, it's a stylistic choice. It's not necessarily a function of making a documentary. You don't have to have a narrator. You would have to,
Unless you can get Morgan Freeman.
well, he is God. Sorry, Ross. It's
You're good.
but it's just a function of how documentaries are made, where you would tend to do a lot of interviews, and then you would then, in order to pull it all together, you're writing the connectives, and so you end up with a narrator. However, if you were to think the story out in advance, far in advance, you could actually put that together without a narrator. But
And also, Amy once again brings up Grey Gardens. So
yes,
Grey
yes.
Gardens was interesting. And Albert Maysles basically followed the
Yes.
the two crazy ladies. I just took footage of them, and he just kept shooting and shooting and shooting whatever was happening, and then he had to go and edit probably like 20 hours of film into something that was 2 hours. So that's a different process. That's a process. Some documentarians like you, Susan, are going into existing files and finding information and finding historical things and probably finding pictures, photographs, existing footage or whatever that demonstrates the story that you want to tell. Maysles didn't know what the story was that he wanted to tell. He just
that's a verite style of documentary that is the story. I mean, Salesman is just, it's a brilliant Maysles documentary. I actually like it a lot more than Grey Gardens, but you couldn't have found anything that was scripted better. I mean, if you ever want to see, I don't know if you've seen Salesman.
no.
It's about the Bible industry, and it's all these salesmen that sell Bibles, and it's so poetic. Just the way these guys end up speaking, you couldn't have written anything better as a narrative play. It's almost Tennessee Williams like. It's incredible. If you get a chance, see Salesman.
I mean, there's his gift. His gift was finding the subjects that would be interesting to follow. I mean, not everybody would have his vision of that. Not everybody would go, oh, this is obviously I want to just take my camera and follow these people wherever they go and see what they're doing day after day. But
but he's starting out fascinated by a subject matter, which is the same in a narrative story, a play, a film, anything. You have to have the writer, interested in that subject enough to want to do that work and spend however many years with that subject matter. That's, I don't think, any different from a play to a screenplay to a documentary. You have to want to spend time delving in that subject matter.
right.
And you have some sense of where that story is going. Even May would have had some sense because otherwise they wouldn't be interested in the subject matter. There's some, however vague, there's some sense that I'm curious about that because I have this impression of it.
I'm also looking at Eric Rothman's comments.
Salesman is streaming on Max. Oh, I'm sorry.
The term documentary is a variable definition, generally indicating more than the usual interests and facts. Like many variable definitions, what it means depends on marketing strategy. Marketing strategy. Well, I don't want to go there. I don't want to go there. I want to keep us in the creative mode. Basically, if somebody watching this becomes inspired to actually just try to create a documentary or look into the possibilities of documentary, this will be successful. I don't want to go into how you market it later and whether you can impose values on it that aren't there when you from the creative inspiration. So I find it an interesting conversation. I don't know how to talk about it as easily as I talk about some other things because I've never done it. I've basically embraced a story that I knew was a story that I'd lived through, and I made up a whole bunch of things. I wrote a musical about the last days of Bonwit Teller, the department store. And when I showed it to somebody who worked at Bonwit Teller, who was one of my bosses, actually, he just looked at me and said, "How did you know all this?" So
Oh, wow.
he said, everything in that was absolutely true.
Right.
But it wasn't a documentary, it was a musical. But I guess a lot of this has to do with an artist's relationship to reality, how you interpret, how you communicate reality in your work.
Yeah, I mean, there are some very, very fanciful films that are still would be qualified as to be called a documentary, that are profiles of people that can become almost painterly in their execution.
Pam suggests the playwright creates the reality, the documentarian shapes the reality. I like that. I also think that there are almost any definition we come up with, there are going to be exceptions, I think. Because I do think that that the playwright doesn't always create the reality. Sometimes they do shape it. Sometimes it's based on genuine, honest research. In playwriting, though, we need to understand that just because it happened doesn't mean it's interesting. That's
Absolutely.
And there is for me is a possible point to bring out. A documentarian is succeeding when they genuinely recreate what happened. A playwright isn't necessarily succeeding by doing that. A playwright definitely has to shape the reality. And I think both creation and the creating a reality and shaping the reality, I think are just two important steps that I think are universal to everything that we create.
Yeah, I would say so, because I think a documentarian has to, if it's going to be a successful documentary, they're steeping you in a world also. It's not just the chronology of facts. They're leaving they're leaving you with an impression of a life and world as much as a narrative story would do. Because they need to capture your attention just in the same way.
I think that we could talk about this for like 25 hours. And
it reminds me of a conversation I had when I was in art school of the difference between advertising or illustrators and fine artists. And it ended up with the teacher writing me a letter, sending it to me, having to do with Da Vinci. And he said, if you look at the definitions of things, Da Vinci was an illustrator and working in advertising. Because he was doing work for the church and to promote the church, which is an advertising function. So it's definitions of things have a lot of crossover.
I think I'm going to start moving more towards your own journey. I'll take Ed's question right now.
Yeah.
Eric's question. How does your job and how does New York politics shape the projects you've made and the ones you were making? Rather than answer that, let's go back to your journey. When did you first decide to put together your various creative talents and make a documentary?
Well, these animations, case in point, I don't know where documentary and animations.
There's that blurred line again.
Yeah, it's a blurred line.
Yeah.
And I won't play the music. Because it's amusing. It's absolutely true facts, but it's picking and choosing, and it's telling a story. And it started because I was hired. I was switching careers, so I was basically taken on as an intern because of my graphic design background and given the chance to become a producer.
So
And
you suggest something else to me that I think I want to bring up. Tone. Oh God, somebody's at my door. Tone is very important too. I mean, basically, we're talking about point of view. Point of view is often shaped by the tone that you choose to take in telling a story. A documentary one assumes is factual and just narrative and possibly even dry.
Right.
The word dry might be used. But that's not necessarily the case in all documentaries. Sometimes you take an ironic tone. Sometimes
Yeah.
you can take a humorous tone, which is what you're describing. You want to have fun with your documentaries. You want to be playful.
Yeah.
You want to mess around with history, and yet be true to it.
Right. Because you want to have as much, for instance, I'll give you an example, again, going back to this historical thing about New York. We're talking about the Lenape Indian. We're in like 1609 when Henry Hudson came through. And I'm reading this book, and he's talking about the Globe Theater. And being an American and think it's like Shakespeare is at the same time as the Lenape Indian. And it just sort of hit me as wow, it just is a weird juxtaposition of two things. And I wanted, when I started thinking about that, it's like, okay, so if I'm going to put that in a documentary, I want somebody to experience what I just experienced. So how am I going to do that visually? How am I going to edit that with that information so that people have that same weird feeling of, wait, these two things were happening simultaneously?
Do you want me to do you want to do a screen share? Do you want to show us
I
an
can show
example?
you one of the animations. I can't show you that because it's not done yet, but I can
Oh.
show you an animation.
Yeah, show us something. Show us, and then we'll
I
talk a
will
little bit.
ask you, would you rather see a story about the Witch of Wall Street, which is basically Hetty Green, who actually was a woman in the 19th century that developed investment. She was the precursor to Warren Buffett, basically. Or do you want to see the story of Santa Claus, how it came about?
Oh, I go for the witch. And anybody in the room want to make a request?
Okay.
I'll go for the witch. And then we're gonna go to some of these other questions about your process. There are a couple questions that have come in about your creative process.
Okay.
And don't forget to click the button that says include sound when you screen share.
Okay. Screens. Oh, let me get this up first. Wall Street. And hopefully I can get this up full screen. Sound and
Oh, good. We got two more votes for which.
aha. Oh dear, where is it? The whiteboard would be it.
No, no, no. It's a green button that says share screen.
No, 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 I've got that. I'm looking at the shared screens, but I'm not seeing the,
If you have
All right.
if you
let
have
me
it up
just
on
try
your
that one.
okay.
Are you getting it right now?
Yeah, we're seeing something. There we go.
Edward Robinson, a man obsessed with money, married the country's most prominent whaling business by way of the boss's daughter, and he wanted a son to keep this fortune in the family. Unfortunately, he got a girl, Henrietta Robinson, so he trained her. By the age of 6, Hetty was reading the financial papers. By the age of 13, she was managing finances for the family business. By 20, it was time for marriage. For wealthy families, this meant a series of fancy dog and pony shows where women were presented. Hetty's father shawed his daughter in $1,200 of the finest dresses. However, as a woman reared to value investment over fashion, she sold those dresses for government bonds. In 1864, Hetty inherited $7.5 million. Had Hetty been a man, it would have been cash. But as a girl, it was caged in a trust. Hetty took matters into her own hands and developed a shrewd plan to grow her annual income. To this day, her investment strategies based on value have been used by the likes of Warren Buffett. She ended up with so much cash on hand that in 1907, when Wall Street fell and the banks refused to make any loans, Hetty was there to bail out New York City. She only charged 6% interest, even though she could have easily gotten 40%, but thought usury was unethical. Given her gender, Hetty would not go unpunished for her good deeds. The Witch of Wall Street was born. The cruel descriptions ranged from her clothes and hygiene to her cheapness. In reality, Hetty, unlike the very public museums and foundations from robber barons of her day, quietly supported a number of charities and gave to Barnard College and Johns Hopkins Medical School on the condition they admit women. In the end, Hetty amassed a fortune upwards of $100 million. That's $2.4 billion today. One wonders how history would have portrayed Hetty had she been a man.
And you even got a little Rudyard Kipling in there, didn't you?
Huh.
So these are this is an example of this of play in the series of a work in the series
Yeah.
that you won Emmy local Emmys 2 years in a row, correct?
Oh, yeah. That one won for writing, graphics, editing, and just for business. It was business consumer, the show itself, the piece itself.
You're getting lots of love in the chat. I don't know if you see it all.
Thank you.
So, how many of these short pieces have you made for the mayor's office? How many are in the series?
15 so far.
15.
Yeah.
And you told me, I may have misunderstood, but I think that you started doing this or actually moving into documentary as a result of shutdown.
Yes. Well, all of these I developed during the pandemic. I would stay up till 3 a.m, and I was already doing archival for the half-hour documentaries in a show called Blueprint. So I was already involved in all the visuals for all of these things. And then I just felt like, let me take it further. And I'm collecting all visuals anyway. let me just do this animations. And I taught myself the animating while I was during the pandemic.
Oh, you did? You taught yourself that?
Yeah. So it's yeah, it's fun.
It is. Oh, good. That's good to hear. It's nice when you enjoy what you're doing.
Yes.
I think that's why all of us are in the arts, because we have the delusion that we enjoy what we're doing. So, can you tell me a little bit about what are the resources you have at your disposal working in the mayor's office? Would you be able to do this if you weren't in that particular job?
The one thing that I would not have access to that is very, very important is the music library. That's
Yeah, the rest of us have to pay a fortune to use music.
yeah, and what we have is a contractual music library, so I can just pick and choose music. I haven't really looked into all of the resources there for free music. My guess is it would not be quite as good. In terms of sounds, which I rely on a lot, that's all free. I actually dig that up from a website out of England that has professional and amateur people just uploading sounds. And every once in a while you have to contribute some money.
Can you put a URL into the chat so people can find more of the these
Oh, sure.
works of yours? I think people are very interested. And the other questions, I think you got a lot of nice feedback here. Jeff Westfield asks, at what point did you decide positively against an actor portraying your character? I think that was never an option for you because of where you are and what you're doing. Your basic tools are graphic. Or
the other things that I'm working on are humans. I mean, I'm interviewing humans for the long form things that I'm doing.
Oh, you are doing. You are.
Oh, yes.
But that's interviewing. That's not. You're not getting. You never thought. Did you ever think of using an actor to portray the Witch of Wall Street?
No.
It wouldn't have been as much fun anyway, because it's how you handle it visually that's kind of charming and kind of endearing.
Yeah. It's basically taking all these archival materials, and it was a progress where I started out where it wasn't as animated, and as it went along, I was playing just with the software and everything like that. It became more and more animated, and at one point my boss wrote back, and I had put everything, all the archive that I wanted to in place, but still it was just still images. And then I said, let me work on it for a while. And then I made everything move, and she came back and she went, oh my God, everything's moving. Because I had done a whole thing about miasma, the beginnings of medicine before people knew what germs were. There was a whole sequence, 3-minute I did on that. So
Pam Grace wants to know what program you use for your animation.
After Effects. It's a combination of Premiere and After Effects.
And Larry, we're gonna put something in the chat so that you can find out where to see more of these.
See, oops, escape. It's NYC. Okay. There's where is the chat? Oh, participants. Where's my chat?
She can make documentaries, but she doesn't know where the chat is. So where's your
Damn.
chat? You have to make sure you open up your chat first of all.
There it is.
You got it. Yay.
And there you go. And this is 2. Okay. There you go.
So now, originally I thought from the email you sent me that your first delving into animation and into documentary filmmaking was during the pandemic, but you had done some pre-pandemic.
Oh, no, yeah, pre-pandemic, I was actually first hired in 2015. Actually, I started interning in 2013. And it was very specifically because of my graphic design background and because they knew that I would be able to lend help with the visuals. And that was basically researching and bringing all the visuals to play. And by 2015, they hired me to continue doing that. And these were on half-hour documentaries for a program called Blueprint.
Oh, so they were longer than these are small pieces. What is the ideal running time for these?
3 minutes. They had wanted me to do it for 1 minute because they didn't think animation could hold people's attention for 3 minutes. And I went, I'm pretty sure I could hold their attention for 3 minutes.
Well, good for you.
There's a lot of things where I had to leave things out because it's 3 minutes, where I think it could be a little bit longer.
Well, this was definitely, I mean, if we want to analyze your piece, it definitely was storytelling.
Yeah.
It had a central character. She had a want. I can see taking the story of Hetty. Is it Hetty? Hetty.
Yeah, Hetty.
Taking the story of Hetty and making it into a play. I'm sure there's at least 3 people in the room who are going to do that now.
Oh yeah, I mean, there are things you had to leave out. Like I end up doing much more research than you end up seeing there, because I have to pick and choose to have it fit into 3 minutes. I mean, this is a woman that toted a gun with her, and she basically went to the robber barons, and at one point they were threatening her son because she was getting into the train business, and she put a gun to somebody's head and said, you can screw with me, but you can't screw with my kid. So she was quite a character. This would be a good person to do an entire play on.
I agree. I would. It's already spurred some ideas for me.
Yeah.
Larry wants to know if you feel comfortable giving us your email address so people can reach out to you.
Sure.
Ross, have I missed any other comments and questions?
There's so many. Let me see.
Let's see.
There's some early ones. I'm not sure if we got them.
Well, let's.
What program to use? Let me see.
Let's just talk a little bit, just a little bit more. And if anybody in the room has another comment or something that you'd like to say, please feel free to let us know. We got new messages.
I just have one comment about having worked in the pandemic and everything like this. The technologies that are around, and I'm looking at some of the AI technologies that are coming up, and even what they're about to put to Premiere, where you can extend backgrounds and just make up stuff out of whole cloth visuals and just type it in and they'll come up with something. And being old enough to remember having to actually do film and do mechanicals with knives and things like that. There is, to be able to experiment now is so much cheaper. It's so much easier to play and just all by yourself to play with how far you can go. That it's kind of wonderful. I mean, there's a scary part to AI and, losing your job and everything like that also, and having it basically take over what you want to do. But there's also the freedom to just play with what does this look like? What could this look like?
I have a question. Do you think that you were influenced at all by Monty Python?
Terry Gilliam, absolutely. Yes. Yes.
That seemed to be this. That seemed to be the style.
Yeah. Where he will take something, cut it up, and then have it do things. Yes. Where I was taking a piece of a face and slapping it onto something. Absolutely.
And let's see. Larry wants to know whether you could list some of your favorite documentaries.
Jesus Camp is fantastic. Jesus Camp. As I said, Salesman. I can't think of. I do like Grey Gardens also. I tried to work at Maisels actually right out of school, but
Interestingly enough, Albert had picked my dear friend Vicki Phillips as a subject for a film that he was going to make. This is the woman whose memorial I'm producing next week. He followed her with a camera, and every time she was in New York, and he's gone. I don't think he's around with us anymore, but there must have been hours and hours of footage of Vicki. He never made the film. So that's kind of a shame. I wonder if I could ever access that film. Somebody wants to know how much you can budget for a soundtrack for a documentary series of 6 episodes.
See, that's the fun part. The
You
mayor's
don't have
office
you don't
has
have yeah you don't have to have,
absolutely no money. So, I've never really had to deal with that because we have in-house, we have the person that does the mixing and sound. I end up doing a lot of the sound design because I just use free things. And then, as I said, we have a music library under contract, so we're not paying individually for cuts of music.
Okay, well, Eric,
So I've never really priced out original scoring of music. Although my understanding is what a lot of people will do is do what I've done in terms of just doing a scratch track of music so that the scorer can get a sense of where the producer or director wants to go with the music.
so that's very much a part of the whole thing that you're very much aware of as a documentary filmmaker is the soundtrack, the soundscape.
Yes, it's huge because I find sound and music. I mean, even this last, we just completed one on Surrogate's Court, the Surrogate's Court building and how it came to be and the whole history of it. And somebody edited it, and I was asked to re-edit the thing because it had no space. There was no breathing room in the entire half hour. It was just sort of like talking. And what I started saying to the editor, I said, okay, I want you to pull out half the talking and I want it to start with street sounds. I don't want to hear music. I don't want to hear anything. I just want to I want to be immersed in just the sounds of where I am. And then I want the music to slowly come up. And then I want to hear somebody talk. So I want a moment to breathe and feel where I am before I hear any information. So that's timing. That's immersing somebody. I mean, you talk about immersing somebody in a sense of atmosphere and space, which is very narrative filmmaking. And it draws you into a documentary.
We have an interesting question from Jeff Westfield. Do you like Alexandra Pelosi? I mean, I assume that's Nancy's daughter who filmed was filming the political scene or something.
Yeah, I haven't seen her work, so I don't really have a comment to make.
Jeff, am I right? Is that do I have the right Pelosi there?
Yes, Bob. She filmed the January 6th.
Right.
Oh,
That's
something
what it was.
out right now. Yeah.
And you know, what she seems to sort of shirk the obligation to really get that out there. You know, we saw it at the time, but very little. She never really put it together in a cohesive thing about the day, and it's so explicit. But you know, it brings me back to my basic question for you, which is, why do you feel the documentary person has an obligation to the source material?
In what sense?
Well, because you can't possibly make a work of art without imposing your slant on it. There's nothing. In
Oh,
other
I
words,
agree. Yeah.
yeah.
You
So
have to make choices.
so then,
Yeah.
but do you have which is your obligation to yourself as the artist, or the source material as sort of a sacred thing that you've inherited one way or another?
Well, I mean, I kind of, for instance, the documentary that I just said, Jesus Camp. I love that documentary. It's very dramatic. It's about these people, this woman that brings young kids into camp and indoctrinates them into Jesus. The documentarian got managed to get the trust of this woman so that she revealed everything that she was doing to these kids. There might have been a line she crossed in terms
Did
of,
she end up in court?
I don't think so,
Oh,
but there might have been the camp was shut down, if that's what you mean. It was absolutely stopped. But there's probably a questionable thing of how far do you go to get somebody's trust or make them think you're on their side to get the story? How much do you lie to a subject matter to tell the story is what it came down to.
I
Well,
mentioned
but
I
it's
mentioned the movie
basically
called.
it basically
Wait,
comes down to the whole thing about what is your goal? What are you trying to achieve? And the same thing that always occurs to me about law enforcement. They can get people to confess things, but because they can just lie in interrogation.
Yeah. I
I'm
don't
not
know
sure.
what the ethics are in making a documentary in terms of that. I don't know if this is far afield from what your original question was, but it seems related to me.
Oh,
yeah,
now
yeah.
now we're in Eric is more moving us to a whole different area, which is the pseudo documentary. That I am Spinal Tap, Borat.
Yes. The mockumentary.
The mockumentary, yes. We have Christopher Guest's whole oeuvre. Those are fun. Those are just basically successful. They're most successful when they're most clearly emulating actual documentaries. That's what makes them funny and fun.
Yeah.
There was one other question for you. What's your dream documentary topic if you had unlimited resources? Is there something that right now you wish you could actually make, and you're trying to find a way of making it?
Yeah, there's one that I've wanted to do. I don't know if I'll ever do it, having to do with the for-profit prison system.
Ooh.
Where I just started doing research on it, and I realized that, especially I came to my attention under the Bush administration, because Rumsfeld and Cheney were heavily invested in a lot of these private prison systems that were popping up right along the southern border, and in holding immigrants and things like that. And it struck me as very, very close to the Reconstruction period in this country, where basically the Bush administration stopped all the laws where you can only have prisoners do license plates or state's business. They took those laws away, and you had a lot of private industry coming back from Indonesia and places like that because it was now profitable to do manufacturing in this country through prison work. And it's as close as you can get to slavery under Reconstruction in this country back then.
You know,
And it went
talking about
along with the three strikes and you're outlaws.
talking about point of view, what do you think of Michael Moore?
I like him. I know a lot of people feel like he's got too in your face point of view, but I like that. I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing, and I find his documentaries entertaining.
It's amazes to me. The more we talk about it, the more I realize how broad a topic documentary is.
Yeah.
Documentary encompasses an awful lot of different kinds of creativity.
I mean, look at Spurlock, where he did the fast food also. Size Me,
Size Me. What is
Super
it?
Size Me.
Super Size Me. Super
Yeah.
Size Me. Yes.
Yeah. Very entertaining. I think it turns out that there was some untruth in his. There was some shenanigans in the making of those documentaries.
Well, that's the problem with the world right now, which is truth is very fragile and it can be manipulated in any way you want.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the great sources of contemporary documentary is the web. It's the information you find on the web that seems so true to life and so believable, and it's
Right.
all bullshit. Michael Moore, I think, I believe I trust him to a degree. I do. But I also know that the assumption going in to watch a documentary, the assumption that you're seeing something that is absolutely true is dangerous. Because even in documentary, as we talked about this earlier, it's going to have point of view. It's going to take information and it's going to pick and choose the information that best fits the point of view of the documentarian.
Yes.
And which would make one of our great documentarians today, Donald Trump. He takes reality and he shapes it in any old way he wants to. I think on that note, I'd like to actually wrap up right now, and I want to thank you for being with us today. Ross, did I miss anybody? You have several votes to do the documentary that you were talking about, so you have.
Yeah, it's getting into the prison system and getting those interviews very, very difficult.
I should fix you up with my guest from 2 weeks ago, Brent Buell, who has worked in the prison system, and he brings theater into the prison system. So remind me to network the two of you.
Okay, but filming in the prison system is not easy. I've spoken to a few people about it and they said it's really hard to get permission to do that, especially in the private prison systems. It's just like not going to happen.
Well, okay. But if you want to have a conversation with him, I'll put you
sure,
together.
sure.
They just made a film about his work in prisons.
Okay.
And it stars Coleman Domingo yet. How about that?
Yeah.
Ooh. And actually, in some ways, I forgot that this meeting with you today was, for me, mentally an extension of what my conversation had been with Brent, because Brent we talked a lot about how you take things that really happened and make them dramatic and actually put them into a film.
Right.
And I go back to my original hypothesis, which is I don't always know the difference between documentary and filmmaking. The line is very blurred for me. I think there are probably purists who would say that a documentary has to have absolute accuracy, except what in the world
There's the
absolute
problem.
Accuracy?
Exactly. It's like we're, especially at this point in time in history, where everybody is asking what is truth, you start doing research and you talk to historians and you go, okay, it really is closer to how you feel about something than anything absolute.
Well, that's basically, we keep rewriting history. I mean,
Yeah.
history, poor history, nobody will leave it alone.
Yeah.
It's never there. It's never, this is what it was. I think that the way history is seen by Ron DeSantis and people in other parts of the world who I don't agree with, it's a completely different set of facts than the ones I'm familiar with, the ones that I know.
I'll tell you something.
My favorite rewriting of history was Ron DeSantis declaring that slavery actually had some good things about it for the
Oh,
people that
yes.
were enslaved.
Yeah,
Oh my God. It's like, really?
yeah.
Give me can I hold on to one little shred of truth in my life?
I didn't realize until I started doing this research how much this country was actually built on the cotton trade. I mean, this country would not have existed without the cotton trade. That we would have been bankrupt. It would have never taken off without the cotton trade. It's what allowed us to expand. I did not realize to what extent. I mean, it was sort of like, yes, there's slavery over here and bad, and growth over here, and that somehow the two are separated, and they're not. They're not. We're actually sitting on top of it. We wouldn't have existed without it. And the other thing I found out that just blew my mind is in terms of the Native Americans, I didn't realize the Iroquois Confederacy, which, by the way, are not Americans, that is a completely separate nation within America. They have their own passports. Their constitution, they were the first democracy. They were a democracy before we were a democracy. Their constitution is what Benjamin Franklin and George Washington based our Constitution on. And they took their eagle, which is the symbol of their Constitution, and the 5 arrows, which our eagle holds, the 5 arrows of the 5 nations of the Seneca, of the Iroquois Confederacy, are the 13 arrows that our eagle holds for the 13 states, colonies. So it's like, wow, I didn't know that. That's our history. So we're not taught that.
No, there are things that we are not taught, and there are things that we have been taught that now come under question a little bit for many of us. Yeah, I think it goes back to defining a documentary is as hard as defining reality. Everybody has their own reality, and you can't convince somebody that their reality is not real.
Yeah,
It's almost impossible because it is very real to them. So on that disturbing note, I'm gonna go off. I'm gonna thank everybody who's in the room today. I want to thank you very much for doing this, Sue. I appreciate it. And every TRU community, all my friends out there, thank you for being with us today. And I'm going to say a little goodbye to any YouTube viewers who happen to stumble upon us, or podcast viewers. Be part of the conversations. Join us. Please come and join us. You can email me at trunltd@aol.com, trunltd@aol.com, and I will send you an invite to these. Yes.
Can I ask one question? When you
Yeah.
put this out on YouTube, do you blur things like emails in the chat?
Oh, nobody sees the chat.
Okay.
Nobody ever sees the chat. No.
Okay, good.
All they see is the film, what we filmed.
Cool.
So coming up in the weeks ahead, just in case anybody wants to join us, next week we're going to be doing something that I call Knowing the Score, the theatrical nature of being an orchestra conductor. Believe it or not, I was put together with a German orchestra conductor named Christoph Schüler, and we're going to have some interesting conversations about how being an orchestra conductor is very much like being a director in theater. And we're going to talk about some of the things that are similar between the two media. Then in 2 weeks, I've got reach for the star and learn about the League of Historic American Theaters. Tammy Pierczewski is going to tell us about Star Theater, which is the Southern Tennessee Area Arts Repertory. It's a small not-for-profit down in Tennessee. And we're going to take another view of theater outside of New York. That's one of the things I try to do here is bring in people from outside of New York. And in 3 weeks, I can't wait because I'm having a conversation with Joanna Gleason. So there. I love Joanna, and I can't wait to bring her in. If you want to support us, we do this for free. It's been a community service since April 17th, 2020. But we have bills. So if you want to actually donate something to us, go to trudonate.com, trudonate.com, and give us $5, $10, whatever you can afford. A major donation if you want. We have an endowment fund now if you want to give something to our endowment fund. So many ways you can support us. You can also join as a member. Most of all, I'd like you to be part of the community and come back and be with us again. So I'll see you soon.
Thanks, Bob.
There.